Hi everyone, I'm Nick Sonnenberg, and on today's video, we're going to be talking about an extremely important topic, and that is process documentation, and specifically a tool that we use at Leverage and we are partners with, and we recommend and implement with our clients, and that is Process Street. Now, if you've been following any of our other videos, or if you've read my book, Come Up for Air, you're familiar at this point with my framework, CPR. And that stands for Communicate, Plan, and Resource. So Process Street is all about documenting processes. It falls into that resource bucket of your intellectual property. And as I lay out in the book, resources, there's two different types of knowledge inside of a company which falls into this resource bucket. You have static knowledge that answers the question, who, what, when, where, and why. Who's the CEO? Where's the office? What are the company core values? And then you have dynamic knowledge that answers the question, how? How do you onboard a new team member? How do you do payroll? That is a process. Anything that has to do with how is a process. And one of the biggest, I would say, misconceptions that people have in business is they don't realize how much in their business actually is a process. And as Vinay, the CEO of Process Street, once told me, and it really resonated, the maturity of a company really is a function of the ratio of ad hoc projects versus well-defined processes that you have. And a goal of any team or organization should be shifting from ad hoc to process. So ad hoc, it's like new territory. Like you're Columbus, you're discovering America for the first time. You're making wrong turns in the ship to get there. But after you've done that journey a few times, you don't want to figure it out again from scratch. You want to document what you've learned in a repository, which is easy to find. So then next time someone needs to go on that journey, they know exactly what they need to do step by step by step. So again, ad hoc stuff, that's what you put into one of your work management tools. We've created videos for what a work management tool is and how to use tools like Asana. So you could go and follow that in the channel. But today we're talking about process. Okay. And again, Process Street is our preferred tool for process documentation. So you don't want to be hacking a project management tool and building templates of workflows in there. You really want to be documenting your processes in a tool like Process Street, which is built for purpose, okay? So I've seen so many of our clients and other teams, I mean, we've been doing this for so long, we've seen thousands of teams and companies do this, where you document how you do payroll or how you onboard a client, and you're documenting that in Asana or in your knowledge base. And look, that's better than nothing. Right? I would rather you do that than it just be all up here or on a sticky note somewhere. So don't get me wrong, anywhere is better than nowhere. But if you're trying to not just kind of be average or slightly above average, if you want to really have a high performing world-class team, then you really need to take your processes to the next level and use a tool like Process Street. And here's why. Okay, here's some of the functionality that you can do in a tool like Process Street that you can't when you're hacking one of these other tools. So first, processes have conditional order that they need to be run in, right? So let's just take podcast as an example. Like I have a podcast that I do with Jay Abraham, where we do a live consultation with a business, and it's kind of like Shark Tank. It's fun. We do a live consultation. We know nothing really about the business. And by the end of it, we come up with a few really big ideas that they can go and implement. Now, for us to be able to do that podcast, it's a process. There's so many things that need to line up and happen in order to do that. We need to find a guest. We need to email the guest. We need to confirm that they're showing up. We need to do a sound check. Then we need to show up the day of and follow some type of format. Then afterwards, the audio recording needs to get edited, needs to go to the guest. They need to approve it, so on and so forth. There's like dozens of steps before it actually hits iTunes, right? Now, you can't do all those steps at the same time. You can't post it to iTunes before it's been edited, and you can't edit it before it's been recorded, and you can't record it before the person shows up. And you get my point. I mean, some things you can do simultaneously, right? So you could be editing and doing show notes simultaneously. You could be preparing for the podcast and emailing the client and doing a few things, but there is an order. You might be able to do steps 1 through 5 in any order, but they all have to be done before step 6. For example, it might mean that if you're doing a short form podcast versus a long form podcast, maybe the steps slightly are different. So you want to have a selector, is this short or long form? And then dynamically certain steps change. You can only do this in a tool like Process Street. You can't do that in a basic template. So also, there's tools that it integrates with, like Zapier, which we've talked about in previous videos too. Zapier is that automation tool. It's like the glue between two third-party tools to communicate with each other. So you could have a process like a new hire process, like a recruiting process, where you have interview steps, so on and so forth. Maybe at the very end, you want to send an offer letter to that candidate. Well, with Process Street, they do have native email sending, but also if you want to use like a third-party tool for email signature, like a PandaDoc or a HelloSign or one of these, you could start integrating it via Zapier. So you click a button and it sends a contract filled out with all of their information. And then when they sign it, you could get automatically notified. So you can see how powerful this stuff can be. Not only is it a repository to document the process in a template, but then beyond that, every time that you have to execute that process, it creates a checklist to ensure that every step is followed properly, that it notifies the person responsible for those steps when they need to be notified, right? Because if I'm responsible for step 20 and 19 steps have to be done before me, I don't want to be bothered right now. Let them go and do their 19 steps and come back to me once it's my turn. When you're doing it with templates, everyone's pre-assigned to everything, and it starts distracting people when they don't need to be distracted. And when you follow a checklist, it minimizes the risk of error. So even if you've done a process 100 times, it's still easy to fumble and forget one step. And sometimes missing a step could waste an hour of your time. There was a really good book called The Checklist Manifesto by a doctor named Artul. And what he said was when they started in hospitals putting checklists inside of surgical rooms, they saw like a 90% decrease in surgical errors just by having a checklist in the surgical room. So this stuff really helps protect your company. It's kind of like an insurance policy on running a process. It's like an insurance policy on not losing a key team member, because if you're dealing with, say, finance, and you have all of your payroll processes documented, all of your bookkeeping processes documented, you have far less risk if your head of finance leaves tomorrow. If you've captured all the processes in one container, you're at far less vulnerability and far less risk of one key team member leaving with all their knowledge in their head the moment that they leave the door. You want to retain as much of that intellectual property as possible and minimize the risk of error and minimize the risk of a key team member leaving with all of their knowledge in their head. And here's a little bonus tip for how to really encourage adoption of this tool, because adopting any new tool is not easy, but whenever there's a mistake or an issue that arises at Leverage, my company, and look, we're not perfect. Mistakes happen all the time. But the important thing is to make sure that you capture as much as you can of information and knowledge out of that mistake to ensure or to minimize the risk of a future mistake that are happening. So whenever something bad happens or a mistake happens, my knee-jerk reaction is to always ask my team, show me the Process Street template. They know to expect that question, right? So it's totally fine. Look, we know mistakes will happen. Show me the template. So one, if there's not a template or for that process, that's a bigger issue. But maybe it's the first time we're doing something, so there wasn't one yet built. So now it's like, okay, well, let's take all of our learnings and build a template. Or, we messed up over here. All right, show me the template. Oh, well, we're missing a step here in the case where we're hiring a designer. Okay, let's update the template. And now we know that in the future, that's not going to happen again. So train your team to think like that. Make sure that they expect to send the process to you or to their colleague or to their leader when there is a mistake, and train your team to ask to see processes when they see a mistake, and make this a collective effort. Make it so that everyone's always trying to think about how do we update and optimize process, and that investment that you do today will pay off dividends tomorrow.